I have tobacco for you, you know,
Ah,
thank you, and ask you if you would just be my guest today and just, share any wisdom that you have. I just want to hear your stories over and over again. So, when I see you, I'll bring this to you, but I do have some for you if you would accept it. Yeah. Like your grandmother taught you.
Chimik Witch, my girl. And what I want to do,
Hi.
Amber, with in receiving that tobacco, and something that I've been doing online in all the meetings and things that I'm doing. And I wish I had the drama of my matches, but I don't. But I'm going to light a candle,
Great.
which is how, when I do research on the downtown east side, I usually invite a participant to light the candle. And the candle is to honor the wisdom and light from our ancestors, and also to honor the murdered and missing women in Canada. Women, men, and two-spirited in Canada. So if you just take a breath right now and feel the beautiful holy energy from our first Holy Mother, the earth, and take a moment to perceive those ancestors, those stars high above us in the sky. And take a moment to feel the beating of your heart. And listen to the blood rushing around in your body. Manitou, creator of all life, we give thanks, Great Spirit, for all that we have in this world. We give thanks for the wisdom and light of the ancestors and the truths and the stories they carried forward so we could have life today. And we give thanks, Great Spirit, for all that we have in this world. We give thanks for all our medicine carriers, for our artists. Give thanks for our storytellers, for our leaders, for our healthcare providers. Give thanks, Great Spirit, for the foods we eat, the waters that we drink, that sacred holy water. Give thanks, Great Spirit, for all the nations that live here on earth with us. And in a good and humble way, Great Spirit, give thanks for Amber, for her vision, for the Wolf Nation, for all the supporters and guides that light her journey. And I ask in a good and humble way that my journey of grief and loss and resiliency and sovereignty be a guide and support to the conversation we're about to have. And we ask in a good and humble way that we say things that respect the life and lifeblood of all living things. And we ask in a good and humble way that we be guided to share our truths. And we give thanks, Great Spirit, for this space, this sacred circle, all my relations. Ho.
All my relations. She Witch. Yeah. So where do you want to start? Where do I want to start? Where do we want to start? Wow. Um,
It's your time. You just guide and I'll share.
well, okay, I'm going to tell you where I've been going with these. So generally, I've been talking with really forward-thinking erotic artists, or women with a sensual edge, who have been pushing the boundaries, because I've had to change my direction with my parlor project, and so I'm online now, and I don't know what I'm doing online, so I thought I would like reach out to the women who knew and would kind of learn from their wisdom. And I thought, well, that's not the only women in the world that I want to know more from. So I thought I would expand my reach to all the medicine women in my life. And you're always at the top of that list.
Set the container now for how we've come to be such um, amazing friends and sisters.
Yeah. I mean, I have chills down my legs every time we get to talk. My heart grows like 10 times. So who are you, Sharon White Thunderbird Woman? How do you say that in is it Anishinaabek? Anishinaabe? How do you? What's the language?
Uh, Anishinaabe.
Anishinaabe.
Yeah,
And you're Anishinaabe Quit.
that's right. So I am mixed heritage. So on my mother's side, both her mom and dad were from a small reserve in Saskatchewan known as Key First Nation. And then my father was a son of immigrant farmers coming straight from the old country when they were settling the prairies in 1905. And my dad had a mental health breakdown, and my mother was a young woman in her 20s in a small redneck northern town in the 50s, and we ended up being apprehended and what is known as the 60s scoop. So my why that's important, how I came to the culture, is because I'm not the same as someone who was born and raised on the culture. I came to it later in life. And you say my name, Wapsi Panishi Ikwe. And I received that name from my maternal grandmother, who was still living when I returned to the reserve. And she was a traditional healer and a midwife for over 50 years. When I met my granny, she said, I brought most of your relatives into this world. And she had a profound effect on who I became. So I'm all these things. I'm Sharon Jinkerson,
Yes.
who is a middle-class girl raised in Burnaby, British Columbia, and lived most of my life in the greater Vancouver area. And I'm also this 60s scooper with a mixed heritage. And I think I would have been from an ego place of proving how great I was in the world and trying to impress my grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the fluky things, as our spiritual journeys typically are, was that I'd had a very terrible accident. And it took a year to recover from this accident. And part of it was I was what's known as a total care patient, where I had to lay flat on my back and be fed for 6 weeks. And what that did was I realized when I turned inward and evaluated my life, I was kind of like the typical template of the day, like a Madonna girl, material girl, living in a material world. And I felt in a time when I couldn't even move a muscle because my back was I had fractures in my back. Um, I realized that the life I was living had no substance and no meaning, and it's like being pushed off the cliff with no bottom. Where do you go? If you admit those things to yourself, then what? And where I was so lucky, Amber, is that I had this rich cultural heritage. And I was realized that one of the things I needed to do was to find out more about who I was instead of just internalizing this adoption as if born to narrative that that's all I was now I'm a Jinkerson and I was something else, but now I'm that. And I started to really break that through that emotional barrier of wanting to be loyal to the family that had raised me and become loyal to what I needed and wanted in life. And I think this is pretty dramatic when we're talking about an adoption legacy, but I think that that is the key crossroads. We all encounter crossroads. And where I consider my privilege is that I had this ancient history and this ancient culture and love and connection. So when I hit the crossroads that I think blues artists and artists have tried to speak of that time,
Yes.
I had something, I had a beautiful spiritual hammock to lay down and rest my weary head and redefine myself spiritually. And an example of how I went from one view, one landscape of an urban living down on Beach Avenue in Vancouver, the place that was happening, to suddenly being at an ancient ritual known as the rain dance and not even knowing what was going on. But my uncle just came and got me. And he had all these things, he and my grandmother, for giveaway at the rain dance. And I stood in the lineup with my uncle, just wowed by the beauty of that dance. Is quite a spectacle, the way they build the arbors, and it's so magical with all the medicines and beauty. And when we got to the front, my uncle, in our language, had given tobacco, as you gave me today, to an elder to tell my story. And his first name was Frank. And so he was saying, she was away from us for all these years. And her grandmother danced in this rain dance and prayed that her grandchildren would return one day because so many of us were taken. And here she is. She was raised in Burnaby, and we can all see she's beautiful, and we're so grateful that the path in her life has brought her back to this place. And I was crying. I didn't know what was going to happen. And I'm like, got my head on my uncle's shoulder and just weeping. And I was so outside of myself that I couldn't control it because I was raised not to express emotion and to be dignified meant to be stoic. But I was so struck, I couldn't help myself. And I remember just looking at his shirt, and he was just soaked from his shoulder all the way down to his waistband because I was just bawling. But to have a spiritual re-entry into the world that's rooted an ancient ceremony like that where the imagery and the songs and the music live deep in your DNA,
Yeah.
to have that just right in front of me at that moment, that I had that privilege due to my birth. Because I know when we talk about Indigenous and non-Indigenous, a lot of academics say to me, I own my privilege. Well, I'm owning my privilege here too, because that talk says that privilege is somewhere above. Well, my privilege is that culture and heritage.
And it has, from what I know of you and I feel like I know something of you, is that that's defined the rest of your journey, I think, is like the symbols and the ritual and the ceremony and the magic and the defining of who we really are from our rightful birthplace. To me, that's who you are. Like, that's what you bring to every moment and to every person that you meet. So I'd love to hear about how that shaped you and like shaped part of your development.
Well, what I think is important for the artist
Yeah.
and for women in particular is to have sacred sovereignty,
Yes.
to have a sense of who you really are. And so I know with my story, I have indigenous roots, which have really drawn and inspired. And the narratives in the stories all tell of the trickster voices. And whereas in a lot of mainstream religion, things are judged and shameful or thought of as sinful, good and bad.
Yeah.
And what I got from my culture was that there's trickster energies. And if you listen to the tricksters, they'll take you off outside of yourself and not being who you really are. And so I think in the colonizer forces in the world, it's diminished everybody's sense of self into being groomed to fit in.
Yeah.
And that leaves the artist vulnerable, and that leaves women vulnerable in particular, because when you know who you are and you stand on your authority and sovereignty, you can paint the painting that needs to be painted. You can express yourself sexually and creatively in this world. And who knows what that looks like? Especially one of the biggest territories in our world has been our sensual, sexual side.
Yeah.
And one time I asked my granny about that because, you know, when you start putting the pieces of my culture together, you get that people were encouraged to be and do and enact who they really are. So what did it mean sexually? And I actually asked my grandmother that question. And she said, looked at me with a really sassy, knowing look, and she said, "We did what came naturally."
Yeah.
And I think that says it all, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
But us having the internal permission to do what comes naturally is part of the barriers. We have a lot more freedom in the world today. People aren't being dragged down the street and tarred and feathered or burned at the stake, but it's our internal sovereignty that needs the healing and the work to really experience the beautiful glory of being human and what our bodies
Yeah.
can give to us in the areas of intimacy, because it's not so much about sexual pleasure so much as us wanting to feel belonged and connected with all of our senses. And that's a very sacred thing. And that's what I really think is, you know, just in our friendship and being around the Parta Project, I think that my role is just to witness.
Yeah.
And witnessing is one of the fundamentals. I know in Western psychology speak, they talk about positive reinforcement, but with ceremony and in a sacred way, it goes even deeper than that. And one time, when I first met my grandmother, and she instantly came across the country to meet me, which shocked me. I phoned the band office, and the chief, I spoke to the chief, who was my cousin. We didn't know it at the time. And he said, "I think I know who you are." He knew exactly who I was because it was a tiny little reserve. And he ran across the field to my grandmother's house. And within a couple of hours of that first phone call to the reserve, she called me. And at first I heard all this muffling back in the days of landlines. And I'm hearing this rustling and tussling, and I'm going, hello, hello. And I was just going to hang up, thinking it a prank call. And she said, is that you, Sharon? And I said, yes. And she said, it's your grandmother. And my whole world, it was one of those moments where the birds stopped singing and there's silence as I took it in. This is my granny. And she said, she wasn't one for chattering on the phone. She just said, I'm going to come and see you. And I hesitated, and I got out my little calendar and started to flip through. And I said, well, when are you thinking of visiting? Kind of like a middle-class Burnaby girl. When are we going to take our holidays? And she said, I'll be on the bus at 5. Oh, okay. And when she arrived, I spent 2 days agonizing. Am I good enough? Am I lovable? Am I going to be beautiful to her? Because it really mattered so much. And the vulnerability you feel as an adoptee reaching out to your people is intense. You're so fragile, and the need to look like people and to be like them and to fit in is really an unbelievable kind of pressure. Anyway, she arrived, and immediately I knew there was something different about her, because everybody on the bus seemed to want to not let her go. Oh, Granny, can I carry your bag and I'll walk you to the car? And I was expecting, I had all of my own racism about my own people, and I don't know what I expected, whether it was going to be Sitting Bull. My references were like Sitting Bull and other angry Russell Means angry Indians. Like, I had this imagined archetype of what I'd been exposed to. Who's it going to be? And she was just this very gentle, loving vibe about her that just took my breath away. And we visited all night, and it came time to settle in, and I said to her, Granny, do you want to sleep on the couch or in my bed? Just being polite to offer her a choice. And she looked at me and said, you were raised away from your people. And as a midwife, when babies were born, I slept with them on their first night here. And because you were born away from your people, she said, I'm going to sleep with you tonight. And here it is, the longing of acceptance and belonging. And I went to the bathroom and got ready for bed and looked in the mirror thinking, she just loves me for me. Am I worthy? Am I a valuable human being enough for her just by virtue of my connection to be loved by her? And I was terrified. I stood in the bathroom fussing around because we want this deep intimacy and connection, but when it's right there for us, yeah. I imagine it's for some people like before they walk down the aisle to get married, it's a sobering breath. And it was that kind of sobering breath for me in that moment. And when I walked and settled in with my granny, it was so easy because her vibe was just so accepting and gentle and low key. So I settled in, and she instantly started to just stroke my face and say, you know, Sharon, you're really strong, but you're gentle. She said, you've got strength, but you're gentle. I'm so proud of you, my grandchild. And she said, and I like the way you are creative and you have style and you're sharp, you know. And she just talked to me, not about what I'd earned, not about what I owned, but who I was. So when we talk about being witnessed, it's deeper than positive affirmation. It's seeing you, Amber, for all. I love your positivity. I love your courageousness. I love your integrity and your deep desire for healing and wholeness and wellness, and your ability to share. and that you take the time and make it happen, Amber. That's who you really are. Very powerful spirit. And it's not a lot of people in the world that have the leadership in our DNA. And I see that in you. And that's what my granny was seeing in me for the first time. All my life had been based on criticism, you know, and we see it in art school where artists get criticism. That's the standard issue way of teaching people. And there's something that can be powerful about criticism, but there's also, I know many artists who were just destroyed by it. And maybe their wounded selves was actually in art school and hearing. I know when I went to film school, it was like a sport to critique people and get nasty. What is that? That doesn't actually help people to grow. It's actually can destroy a person's confidence, and they have to spend years in therapy to get it back. It's institutional. So I know these are the things, the medicines in my bundle that mean more. I also have sacred things from my granny, but the important thing is that love and witnessing. Those are the most powerful medicines in my granny's bundle. And as people wake up in the world and have self-confidence, they can give that to each other. And just imagine, Amber, where are we all going with this? If we can start witnessing instead of critiquing, where might we end up as humanity, and especially as women? And I know I know myself made many awkward attempts to express my sexuality and sensuality and just never felt good enough. And that really impacted my experiences because I was more worried about the other person than me.
Well, yeah, I think that's partly why I'm doing these conversations, is because the inadequacy that I feel around these women, these powerful, beautiful, sexy, like fearless. I don't know. There's something where I'm like, wow. There's something in me that is scared of them, or feels threatened, or inadequate. And so I thought, why don't I just get to know the power inside the humanity inside this person, because I believe that that's actually the reflection of me that I'm scared of knowing. So that's why I wanted to lean in is this, trendy way of saying it, but to witness someone in their great power, to me, is a way to witness myself in the places that I've always been really scared of. So, and I really do attribute a lot of that to you and the witnessing that you've done with me. It's how I lead the Wolf Lab, is with all just beautiful witnessing, and it's had a profound effect. Can we talk about that legacy, or that, like, I mean, you work with women in all sorts of ways, and you talk about the matriarchs often in our conversations. So did you want to maybe move in that direction? Where else that you want to go?
Well, what I would say is, in the spectrum of human beingness,
Yeah.
there's really profound empowered authority,
Yeah.
and that's really valued in the world. So the alpha male boss, and in the 80s it was the big power suits and people being straight shooters, but not without compassion. It was all about getting what you want for you, and you have a right for you. But that's a very lonely world.
Yeah.
That creates separation. And everything I learned from my grandmother was about oneness. And what I do know, Amber, is that what's more powerful is gentleness. What's more powerful in the world is kindness. And somehow we've got this matrix that we all run on, that in order to be heard in the world, it means being not necessarily aggressive, but assertive. That's the word, assertive. But being the beingness part, the matriarchy, I think nurtured the compassion and the lighter side of the matrix of human beingness. And I would suggest that in my work, it's about helping women to discover, because it's like a musical scale and the notes on the scale, that because it's not about dishing assertiveness, it's about bringing into balance
Right.
the lighter medicines.
Yeah.
And then the sacred part of it is creating ceremony, because I don't, even describing it as the great mystery settles for me, because when we invoke the powers of the universe and something outside ourselves, and all the people, the thousands of matriarchs that walk this earth, giving birth and passing away, dying, going through the sacred west door, giving birth and dying, all the way to us, is an extremely powerful notion.
Yeah.
So that when I am trusting myself to be vulnerable, trusting myself to be gentle and compassionate,
Yeah.
and to put that, you're vulnerable. It's way easier to be assertive than it is to be really opening up your spirit and sharing it. And yet in this world, that's what we crave as humans. We need that. And so the matriarch, or bringing alive the matriarchy, we've had a lot of political activisms starting in the last century, from the suffragists on up. And one thing I know, and this isn't to say that mine is the one and only culture reference group that had this, but upon researching, I've realized that Susan B. Anthony and her fellow suffragists, which started the women's rights movements in the States, were actually inspired by the Haudenosaunee grannies,
Yeah.
because we had women's rights were enshrined, the sacred rite of passage ceremonies, those things were in balance. And, I'm sure there were women who talked about themselves as being unhappy with their lot in life and not being able to get an education or travel or have the same freedoms as men. But I think the Haudenosaunee demonstrated what it looks like to have a matriarchal practice in balance and working in tandem. And then they could dream themselves into a new reality as a result of that inspiration. And so that's where we've got lost, is that many ancient cultures had that balance. And I believe even in Europe, there's lots of evidence when you look around some of the archaeological digs of circles and references that are very similar to our people. And so did that get women's rights get extinguished a few thousand years ago, but they at one time also had that matriarchal consciousness.
I think my favorite part of the Haudenosaunee, the matriarchal system, to me, just to honor this, is that it's the clan mothers, the grandmothers, that decide the chiefs. I love the idea, and that they can be deposed at any time. And I have this image in my mind at council of the chiefs looking back at the grandmothers to make sure that what they're doing is in line with what the community needs. And it's the grandmothers that know, because it's their loss, right? So they decide very carefully who they want to speak on behalf of the community. So to me, that makes it's just intuitive to me. That makes the most sense. And I just love this. To me, the visual of that is just really powerful. And, I wanted to say that in a place where it can be heard to as many people as possible. But yeah. And I do agree that vulnerability is a strength that we need to be cultivating in each other more. Definitely. Yeah.
Absolutely. And excuse me, when we look at the whole notion of things being right or wrong,
Mm-hmm.
or evil and good,
Yeah.
is a paradigm that creates this wall and separateness.
Yeah.
And that's what I love too about our culture, because we have the tricksters, and thinking of trickster energy in our life is a whole different container to put the things that we consider our defeats or our failures. Oh, it was the trickster. And so my references are no longer, well, this is good and that's bad. It's like, well, the trickster got in the way of my success. And so even when I go to write something or to express myself in a ceremony, and there's a trickster voice there, because I go through this as well in my experiences. Sometimes I can walk into a room, and if I feel a certain edge in the air and tension, I take a real sobering breath, because to run a ceremony is to be vulnerable, is to be in the moment and bring all of you there in that moment. And if you hold back, it still might be a pretty ceremony and successful, because I've had situations where I have held back and people are just crying me and thanking me later. And I go, well, I didn't really feel like I was there, but it's great. But I do know what it can be when I am all in. And
Yeah.
so if I hear a trickster voice that starts saying, oh my God, this crowd could really turn on you, Sharon, like there's a heightened electricity in the air. And if you play your cards wrong, there could be a guillotine around the corner, like an emotional guillotine, look out. And I just have to say, that's the trickster.
Yeah.
That's not the truth. And if I bring my ancestors and bring that matriarchal strength and allow myself to be all of who I am in that moment, then there's connection.
Yeah.
There's deep connection and intimacy that can occur in a ceremony. And a lot of our rituals that I experienced in the world growing up were kind of by rote. You memorized everything. It had a beginning, a middle, and end, and it was the same old. And people, in the various ceremonies I witnessed, were practically falling asleep. They just did it because they were supposed to do it, but they weren't engaged at all. So this is, again, I think a part of activating that matriarchal consciousness is that ceremonies need to be interactive and involve everybody, and be a place where people's wholeness is invited to be present and even an active agent. So I try really hard with my ceremonies to involve as many people. Mostly I work with women, so mostly matriarchs, to be involved in creating the sacred space. So we're all making it up together, and I might be the leader
Yeah.
in the room that's guiding the process, but it's really about engaging everybody. And that, again, I don't know the Haudenosaunee story. I know my grandmother's story, but that's how things were done.
Yeah. Well, you did. I've been with you for a few ceremonies. Been privileged and honored to be a part of that. And one of them was to bring the ancestors into the space where I did the parlor project for the first time. And it was a profound moment for me. And you gifted me with a beautiful feather that I used in my ceremony in the parlor project. which is really about telling a one woman's story. And maybe you could talk a little bit about where this part of your life came from, like where you do these ceremonies, where did it come from? And yeah, I sometimes I don't ever really know I know that you've got a story to tell about that, but where your history is there.
Well, I think I'll speak about it in abstract, and hopefully a concrete example will come to mind so it's really clear. But when I met my grandmother, of course, in a colonized world, I wanted her to just teach me the rules so that I could run the perfect ceremony and do everything right. And it was an endless frustration because she didn't teach and spell it out.
Yeah.
She more or less set the stage for me to have experiences and encourage me. And I remember us getting frustrated because, or myself being frustrated because I'd say to her, well, she'd say, well, it's good time to do a ceremony this morning. And I'd be, yeah, what should we do? And she'd be like, well, look at me like I was going to ask you. And I'd be, well, I don't know what to do. And there was these long pauses and awkward silences. So then I would think, well, I'm going to go and get my little bag with my smudge stuff. And so I go and get it and then stand there and wait for direction. She'd say, oh, it's good you've got your medicine. Then I'd be waiting, thinking, okay. So I would go slamming out the door, literally in a bit of a huff, and thinking, when is she just going to give me the goods? And it's because I'm not measuring up. And what do I need to do to get the badge so that I can advance to the next level of instruction? And then I'd go out into the woods and she would, a word. My grandmother spoke the language of all the creatures that were around us. So dogs that barked, or cats, and bird songs.
Mm-hmm.
I would think, well, Granny really listens to the birds, and she would tell me what's going on in their community, if they were just gossiping, if the birds were gossiping, or if they were having babies, or if they were frightened. She would say, oh, the birds are gossiping right now. And so then I would think, well, I'm just going to sit and listen to the birds. And that's exactly what it was my own sacred sovereignty. And there weren't any rules. The important part was there was inspiration for how she handled tobacco and the medicines, and really time-honored protocol. So it wasn't all loosey-goosey either. But it's like the difference between a paint by number for an artist and just being given a blank canvas and a pot of paints. And that's what my granny was saying. I'm not going to give you a paint by number ceremony. I'm going to give you the paints and some brushes and the canvas, and you make your own vision. But I was terrified. And I would love to say that it was all happy ever after, but I spent, a good many years, maybe 15 or 20 years, trying to prove myself in this red road consciousness where a lot of our indigenous wisdom keepers, and this is by no means criticism because we come by it honestly through our pain, but it has been kind of bottled up with protocols in the same way that other religious institutions are. It's more about the protocol and about holy relics than it is about people and love. Mm-hmm. And so I had to come to that sovereign place within myself and gain the confidence. So I think that's another thing why it's grandmothers, because I think you need to have I'm a mom and a grandma now myself, and all of those experiences led me to the next place. And you can't get to this place without all the journeys around the sun on the earth to figure it out.
Yeah.
And so what I say to young matriarchs like yourself that maybe struggle, it's exactly this is, we are like Shakespearean actors with all of these experiences, the people who love us, the people who reject us, the ambition that we hold, but then we get there and we realize it's just empty. You have to go through all of those hurdles. So it's impossible. Like my son now is 27. And I keep reminding him, you're 27, you're just going to have to live, because every experience is actually a success. It builds you to the next, to gain that confidence. And there's young, what I would call, what do they call those young, like Mozart? He was a child prodigy.
Yeah.
There's prodigies that are sort of beyond their years of knowing in certain ways, but still, if you look at their whole overall life, it's impossible for a prodigy to have balance in all the areas. And that's what I'm talking about, the wholeness of our human experience.
Yeah. And you do, I'd love to just maybe touch a little bit on the ceremony that you're doing right now with women, if you can. In Because I kind of, I'm not sure how to word this properly, but I'd like to know about moving forward a little bit with you. Like where are you visioning yourself and these matriarchs that you've been, because the way I see you is that you've been training us all. That's how I see it. And and we're all taking these teachings and training others too, like it's this what your grandmother did. And so like how do you vision that, or like what is it that you're doing now to lay that foundation, or is it that, I'm not sure.
I Where my comfort is, although I've been fortunate enough to have been a part of many many spiritual and political and social in kind of in the thick of things here in Vancouver. And what I see myself is just planting seeds in young women from all walks of life. And my grandmother used to say, I love how people pray. It's the most sacred thing. And she would, oh, I love when human beings are praying. And so one of the experiences I had with her was also going to other people's ceremonies. Because when you listen to that, there's some energy there, even if a religion is sort of, in my view, regimented and about following the rules. Even when there's prayer or song, I can still be uplifted in a really holy way.
Yeah.
And I think part of spiritual sovereignty is for people to know they carry these abilities, and it's their innate human, not only right, but responsibility to, at the risk of sounding righteous here, responsibility to bring those forces and to own it and to weave it into their lives. Because we've been taught to run to the priest, run to the minister, run to the rabbi. They're the wise people. When in fact, I know that we have a source deep within us.
Yeah.
That really is the keeper of right and wrong. So I see not so much as like events and ceremonies, because it evolves along. It's true, I do ceremonies to plant seeds.
Yeah.
But the real goal is to have people creating oneness by appreciating others' ways of praying and singing, but also to honor their own vision for themselves and bringing it into the world. That's what's going to save our planet, is strong human beings who know who they are, who sing their spirit song, who make ceremony to bring their tribes and their people and their communities together, and don't wait for somebody else who's considered an authority to just bring it. They're important knowledge keepers. I'm not taking anything away from those people and their study or their strengths, but it's so important. It's the same with artistry. How many people creating art is sacred. I'll give you one teaching about my name when I'm talking about that, and that is that White Thunderbird Woman. In our teachings, lightning brings the ideas from the creator to this earth. And many times lightning, when it hits the earth, it actually ignites a fire. The very thing that happens to us when we spiritually transform, a fire is ignited inside of us. And a fire is ignited in our mind too. So I carry thunder as my name, and it's associated with lightning. And so everything, all of creation, even the creator, we're a result of that act of creation with the world. Mm. And we are here, we have the force of creativity within us. And when it becomes colonized and becomes a commodity to be bought and sold in galleries and only something an elite few can enjoy, that medicine, that force of creativity ceases to manifest in the way that it could. So what is the human potential if we're manifesting creativity? And I think that my ceremonies are the pathway forward for people to start manifesting and owning their own creative sovereignty, their spiritual sovereignty, their identities in a very empowered way, instead of looking for, we're so rule oriented. Before you can drive, you need a license. Well, you can still drive without that license, but it's like you can't drive until you get that piece of paper. And we're like that. I hear people saying, oh, I've never been to art school, I'm not an artist. Well, some of our greatest geniuses actually never had formal training, and that's the joke of colonization and what we sort of ascribe to unconsciously too. So to me, the ceremonies that I run with matriarchs are about planting those seeds to ignite those things. And here's another thing about sexuality and creativity, is that when we have an idea, and I know you know this, Amber, and you see suddenly it comes to you what to do. Either if you are creating ceremony, if you're creating art, it's like an orgasm in your brain. Mm-hmm. And we have the orgasms when we have sex and also create life. And so creativity is also really associated. Like, did the creator have a big orgasm and we're the result? The earth and life? Just like women, and that's the feminine cosmology right there. Oh. And so anyway, just a few thoughts about that, about what's important about spirituality is to bring us to a place of being creative.
And you have a long history of this journey of being an artist, or trying to be an artist, like trying to understand yourself as an artist. And is that what kind of that journey, you might have to clarify that for me, because I'm trying to remember exactly. But I feel like your gift of ceremony, of being a ceremony keeper, it is birthed from this journey a little bit. And what you do when you work with other artists, because you've had a history of bringing in all sorts of artists together, is that what you do is kind of lift the veil, or like remove that screen between earth world and spirit world for artists to really let go. And so is that part of, am I right in understanding that? Is that part of your journey in becoming a ceremony keeper? Or has this always kind of been your path?
One of the things you might be referencing, Amber, when I really was working full throttle as an artist, and that's how I made my living, I had a mass dance theater company with my partner. It's another thing about myself, I'm a widow, and I had a very collaborative, on all levels, partnerships with a Tsimshian woodcarver by the name of Wilaha, which means big sky, and his other name was Victor Reese. And we started Big Sky because we wanted to create the space to explore the mystical side of creativity. Because we'd had the images, and Vic was a very powerful mask carver, and we had the culture, but somehow even in the creative process, for example, in Victor's culture, the initiation, the importance of an initiation for artists and the importance of initiating a creative space no longer happened. And even in the colonized world, artists were animating culture and bringing ancient imagery alive again. But somehow the spiritual side was really low key. It's grown and grown and grown. But Vic and I wanted to use our tools and skills as artists, but to put the ceremony first and central, and nothing begins without the ceremony. Because you know that what I'm speaking about, that lightning that goes off, what I encountered and what I know, even if I go to write something, if I do ceremony to honor all that came before me and all that's about to come and all of who I am in this moment, when I even just light a candle with those thoughts, all the way to a full-on feast and a acknowledgement with witnesses present to say this is what we're entering. And you don't make it about I'm going to create a mask. You make it, what are the ancestors going to get up to today? And how can I offer myself as a pair of hands for the ancestors? It's absolutely magical, and the creative process just explodes in when that occurs. And that's what I've known and what I've experienced. I've seen how it works and believe it. And I can still, Amber, in the modern society, get so busy, and a deadline will come up and oh my God, I've got to write an article, and just find myself in full throttle, struggling, trying to get creative and find the muse, and then realizing, oh my God, I need to just slow her down and make a ritual, and to offer myself as the ancestors' messenger, as opposed to Sharon making a great piece of art that can wow everybody. There's a whole different consciousness around that.
Yes, because of COVID, I've had to change course. Like my tour is not happening, and who knows when travel will be allowed again. Who knows when we'll be allowed to be in a room full of 50 people? We don't know. And I've had to change course, and every day I ask. I don't know who I'm asking, but I'm just asking just for the path to be cleared for me, to guide my feet and clear my path for what I'm supposed to be doing next. And when I do it, sometimes I do it because of my ego, and I'm like, I need to be doing my thing. But then what I'm doing is in like my purpose is to be in service, so how do I do it in that way? Then it all just like opens up. Then I can have conversations with like powerful women like you, and it makes a lot of sense. So I appreciate that. Yeah, it's a good reminder. I need it sometimes.
Well, and the cycle continues, because I think that battling with the trickster is a part of being alive. And it's an important entity and force in the universe, because if we were all having these orgasmic creative moments, and then we went from one moment to the next, it'd get pretty beige.
Yes.
And so I'm not saying either that the sort of the institutional notion of sacrificing in order to be forgiven and reborn, I don't believe that exactly, but I do realize and recognize that things happen in life, and mainly for me, it's a bit of an ego thing because I sometimes, rather than nurturing my garden and doing what's good for Sharon, I'm out there way too much in the community.
Right.
And recognizing, and that's constantly one of my struggles and cycles, because I do mediocre work if I'm not looking after myself. And I'm actually the unbelonged little girl again, looking for acceptance and putting those things first. So I struggle with priorities. And I think that's part of a wellness in elders. Look for elders who will share their struggles.
Yeah.
Because it's really, the journey is a struggle, but the struggle is also where great art comes from. And the struggle is in transcending and transforming and putting those experiences, holding them as very sacred and not letting the trickster call you down. And just let the grandmother hold you up, and that's always a struggle. It is with me too. I know these things and I can speak of them, and I've had loads of experience, and I can still fall into the gray zone myself.
Well, we've had a good hour and a bit of chatting. Is there anything else on your heart that you want to say right now? I mean, I could talk to you forever, and I'd love to have you back. But for now, well, okay, here's a question. This is how I usually end these little chats. If you were a flower today, what flower would you be in this moment?
At the risk of sounding entirely egocentrical right now, I said this very thing to my son the other day, because I know a lot of wisdom keepers that in the world that blow me away. Mm-hmm. But I don't know a lot that have necessarily wellness, in that they will talk about themselves as still struggling instead of presenting the perfect picture. Mm-hmm. And so I said to Saul, and yeah, that's how my granny was. She presented herself as not the perfect picture. And one of the things is that my granny loved to cheat. When we were playing cards, she would cheat. And I would get so upset, because in my colonized world, I think, she broke the rules. That's not right. But I realized after a while that Indigenous people, we're strategists. And so who says that the rules are it? Yeah. Maybe it's smart to be a strategist and jump ahead of the rules. So then I started to cheat. And then pretty soon it got ridiculous because we were both cheating. And then one day, excuse me, we were really scowling at each other because we were both cheating to such an extent. And Victor came around the corner and took a picture, and of us kind of scowling at each other. And then, we were just totally, after you, Granny. No, you go first. It's your turn. Oh, don't forget to pick up this card. So nice to each other. Yeah. But what I know from that is the very humanness of my granny. And when I would want to hold her up on a pedestal because I revered her wisdom and intelligence, and her ceremonies were so powerful. Yeah. And life affirming and freeing, that I would tend to put her on a pedestal, and she would correct me with all of her struggles. And that's the mark of a great wisdom keeper and leader. A spiritual leader is someone who will really not just present the good days, it's presenting the gray and the dark days too. And my granny always held herself in that balance. And I think that's like an orchid. It's rare in this world. It exists. I know I'm not the only one, but I can honestly say that there's just a small handful of other knowledge keepers from around the world that I've met that I really respect for for being able to be a whole human being publicly, so that everybody doesn't think, oh, they've just got it going on, and Sharon just never gets up and doubts herself. She's just creating magically all the time. And so I said to Saul, I think we must be like orchids, because I haven't really met very many spiritual people in my lifetime that really present the whole medicine wheel, all their wisdom and their trials and tribulations. So that's what I would be, Amber. I'd be a little beautiful lady slipper or something
Oh,
in that's delicate but powerful. When you see one of those orchids in nature, it's just breathtaking. And it's so fragile and yet so powerful and strong at the same time. And that's what I'd be. I'd be an orchid.
well, I will add you to the bouquet. Beautiful bouquet that I'm gathering. All these incredible flowers. I'm so always just so appreciative of your time. Like sometimes like I don't know why you're spending so much time with me, but I'm, you know, I take everything that you tell me and I just squeeze the juice out of it as much as I can. I'm so grateful. I'm humbled, and I see you. I see your creativity and your guidance. I see your gentleness and I see the trickster in you. I see how you can be, uh, uh, tapping on someone's shoulder from around the other side. I like your playfulness and I just see your love and your dedication to oneness. And so I thank you. I thank you for being here. Yeah.
And Amber Dawn, I love you. And I want to know before we close, what kind of flower are you?
Okay. Well, so today, what flower am I today? I'm a peace lily. I'm a peace
Mm.
lily today. I'm looking outside. I have one on my front balcony. It was a gift to me from a couple years ago, 3 years ago. And these peace lilies it doesn't matter what I do to them. They just keep blooming. And they're so simple and just yeah, they just radiate with, I don't know, they just radiate, but they never stop blooming no matter what. So I would say today I'm a peace lily. I feel like I just keep blooming no matter what.
Beautiful. Well, it's been an honor to share with you, and I support you in bringing beauty in the world
Thank
in
you.
all the ways that you do, Amber. I always will.
Thank you.